wonder, should I use this or should I just...
Why don't you,
And where should I set it up to? It can't be in front of the camera.
no, why don't you come in here? How does the, do you put it there like that, or?
Yeah. Do you want me to just leave it go now?
Yeah. Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing. Testing. Suzanne, you want to give us a 1, 2, 3 on the right there?
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3. Testing.
What code? The one I spelled right?
Testing.
How are you? I did not recognize you. You look amazing.
Welcome, everyone. Glad to see you here. Feel free to have a seat, make yourselves comfortable. We'll be going live in about 6 minutes. And Cody, maybe you need us to be quiet for the 30 seconds before 6. We can just chit chat up until, and you'll release the signal. Very good. I'm Glenn Wheeler from Email Matters. And we have chairs if you want to sit. And we'll be on the air in 5 minutes or so. Go first. It's family radio, so...
I poured your glass of water.
Glenn. Glenn. Good. Okay. Yeah. So I think you got to go this way. Just, no, it's not going to work. Look. It's got to go that way.
One more turn.
Okay.
Yes.
No, well, that was that way. And if I go this way, see? So it's got to go this way. Right? I don't know. Are we going to get everybody with it vertical?
You could turn it as people speak.
Yeah, but if I turn it horizontally either way, you go sideways. Yeah, no. What?
What do you want me to do? Turn this?
Yeah, if you can.
This way?
Yeah, somehow. Okay.
Testing.
Now,
Here we are.
just too much now.
Audience participation is optional. But if you could applause.
I don't want to, yeah.
Which is Welcome to Ligma Matters, episode
Oh,
40.
why not?
We would much appreciate it. That is the only applause line. If you could applause, if you could applaud there,
Okay.
much appreciated. We can afford signs. This is community radio, Charles.
Too bad.
You haven't got everybody.
Huh?
You have to turn it a bit.
Yep.
Bit more.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for it. There we go.
That's it. Yeah. 15 seconds, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Mi'kmaq Matters, a podcast about the Mi'kmaq people and the Qalipu First Nation. I'm Glenn Wheeler. We're broadcasting live from traditional Mi'kmaq territory in Elmistuquik, the Bay of Islands. It's 6 p.m. November 16, 2017, and we're with an audience at Glenfell Campus in Corner Brook. We're celebrating 1 year of Mi'kmaq Matters and their live at 100.1 FM of our partner Bay of Islands Radio. Greetings to those of you joining us on the Voice of Bombay at North Point at Rocky Harbor and around the world on boir.ca. Welcome to Mi'kmaq Matters, episode 40. The land we're on today was among the last parts of the east coast of the continent to be settled by Europeans. Before that, the first peoples lived as they always did, hunted caribou, caught eels, stayed warm in winter, moved from the interior to the east to the coast in the spring. There was a rhythm in their lives. It was right here that traditional indigenous life in what is now Atlantic Canada lasted the longest. How ironic, tragic even, that we ancestors of those first peoples will be here today trying to recover Mi'kmaq identities taken away from us by colonization, confederation, Joey Smallwood, racism. That's not a complete list. Today we celebrate how far we've come, ask where we're going, and perhaps see if there's a Mi'kmaq trail to get there. The Qalipu First Nation is one of the largest in Canada, but we have more people of Mi'kmaq ancestry outside the band than in. We have a cultural awakening happening. The Flat Bay Powwow this past summer was the largest and most successful ever. But as much as many of us yearn to embrace our Mi'kmaq culture, we hold back, feeling awkward and self-conscious about taking those first steps. How do we craft our individual and collective Mi'kmaq identity, heal divisions, fire up our political power, and build our Mi'kmaq nation? That's our conversation for the next hour or so. You can message us on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Mi'kmaq Matters, and we'll have a Q&A later in the program. You can also see the video of this program via Facebook Live and on Rogers Community TV at a date in the future, which we'll let you know about. So, let me introduce our panel. On my far right, Frank Skierd, Qalipu Councillor for Glenwood. Welcome, Frank. Next to Frank, we have Suzanne Barry, who is the former president of NON, the Newfoundland Aboriginal Women's Network. And next to me is Charles Pender, former mayor of Corner Brook. And some of you may not know that Charles was the first chair of the Qalipu Cultural Foundation at a point in the future. But Charles, you weren't there this past summer for the Grossmorn Cultural Festival controversy. Are you jealous or relieved that you weren't there?
I'm good as I am.
Yes. Okay, so Frank, let me start with you. You were the Qalipu councillor for Glenwood, but you grew grew up in Mount Moriah, down the bay here, and you, I suppose, still have some family down in Mount Moriah.
Yeah, I have my mom and my brother still lives in actually Cornbrook.
Now, Mount Moriah, if you look across the bay from Mount Moriah, what's across there? Is it Gillums that circulate across?
Well, Gillums is across from, say, Halfway Point, so that would be, I never really thought of that. It'd probably be Meadows, maybe 5%.
Now, back in the day, I suppose before your time and our time, I suppose there was quite a lot of back and forth, do you think, between Mount Moriah and the other side of the bay? People would...
Absolutely, straight across.
Yes. People would get in the boat, go romancing on the other side of the bay, but...
Well, what seemed to happen is it's not a lot different than it is today. A family member moved across and someone else needed a job or had a job and needed a place to stay, so that's where he went. So
yes.
That's how it went. My aunt came to Mount Moriah, and then my mom did, and mom got married, and that's how it goes.
I suppose at that time there was probably more relationship between the communities in the Bay of Isles than there is today, because with the road, Cornerbrook became the focus. It sucked up the attention, and those communities like York Harbor, Gillums became bedroom communities, and something changed there.
Well, I guess leave to me to disagree with you this early in the conversation, but yes, Cornerbrook is kind of the epicenter there now because you kind of drive through it, but I think that if you're talking to someone from Cox's Cove to York Harbor, they're kindred spirits, let's put it that way.
Yes. Suzanne, welcome.
Thank you.
You've been back in St. George's for some years after. How long have you been back since you're...
Since August of 2014.
And before then, you were in New Brunswick, in Fredericton.
That's right.
And you were a social worker, and you ran a mobile crisis center. What is a mobile crisis center?
It's a mobile crisis unit, and we worked with RCMP and City Police. We were actually a mobile mental health unit. So we would go out to crises, we would be called out if there were any mental health calls that came into police, but also we worked with people that came to us, that called us.
When you worked in New Brunswick, you, I understand, worked with Mi'kmaq people, Maliseet people in New Brunswick.
Yes, that's right.
And what was that like? Did they ask? Did they accept you as a Mi'kmaq person? Were they skeptical that you were one of those Mi'kmaq people from Newfoundland?
I ran into that. Mostly in the area where I worked was Maliseet, several First Nations, and it took, of course, as it always does, it took a while for me to gain trust. But when I worked in the mental health offices before I started with the mobile crisis unit, I was always the one that was called to go in and maybe might be a crisis on reserve, or I might be called in to talk to someone. But it was usually me as a Mi'kmaq person.
Charles, you were mayor of Cornerbrook for 2 terms, and you were on council for, was it 3 terms?
2 terms.
2 terms on council. And do you think, of course, Cornerbrook is not that old as an amalgamated city. Do you think you were the first Mi'kmaq mayor of Cornerbrook?
Probably the first who knew he was Mi'kmaq. There may have been others before me that probably didn't realize their ancestry.
Yes. Now, I wanted to speak to you about Cornerbrook as an indigenous city. Population of Cornerbrook now is just under 20,000. We have a high concentration of Halibu members here, and of course people who are otherwise Mi'kmaq. Perhaps maybe Frank can tell us. Maybe there are 5,000 Halibu people who live in Cornerbrook, and maybe that's a conservative estimate. So something like 25% of the population of Cornerbrook would be probably Halibu members. It's interesting that if you look at Winnipeg is considered to be, if you look at the news accounts, is considered the most indigenous city in Canada with 10% Aboriginal population. Yet here we are in Cornerbrook with 25%. And when Brian Bauman became the Métis mayor of Winnipeg, that was a big deal. In Corner Brook, not so much right now. We think maybe 3 of the 7 council members are Mi'kmaq. What was it like for you being the Mi'kmaq mayor, a Mi'kmaq person who was mayor of Corner Brook?
Good question. I mean, I really didn't see myself as any different than anyone else. When you're mayor, you represent everyone, all constituencies, so you don't stand up and say, I'm this or I'm that. You try to, in your relationship with the community, represent all different groups and so on. But it was something that I acknowledged, and we acknowledged it publicly. And I guess we were the first council to be sworn in. We were smudged before we were sworn in. And that's the first time that ever happened. And to acknowledge and to make mention as we could, without getting any pushback, because that happens, that we are a Mi'kmaq community. But I don't think the larger community sees it as a Mi'kmaq community. And maybe that's because the Halapu is recent. It's very new. It's it's not something that we've lived with for the last 100 years or so. And it's something that's will grow over time as more and more people become culturally aware of the Mi'kmaq and the Halapu and who they are and what their role is in nation building.
So, do you think so? There isn't, and Corner Brook doesn't yet have a Mi'kmaq identity as a city, would you say?
No, I wouldn't say, and there's all the controversy, of course, with the enrollment and so on, which is divided people and taken away a lot of people's interest or whatever. But as somebody who was in council, I was chair of the cultural foundation before I was elected mayor, actually, and continued on in that for a couple of years. And there was, I won't say a resistance, but there wasn't quite what I would call an openness to accept this community as a Mi'kmaq community. There's something there yet that is not, let's say, welcoming and arms open and saying, this is who we are.
You're talking about residents or your fellow council members?
Probably both, right? Because my interaction as mayor with the Halapu was generally through the band, through members of the council or the staff, or acknowledging different days and things like that. We had one council member, Keith, who was, very adamant about, speaking about the Halapu and so on every occasion. Keith Cormier, and he actually got pushback from other councillors for that. So, it's again, I think it's one of these things that it's going to take time. And as the Halapu becomes more integrated into the community, as the enrollment issues get resolved, as economic development occurs, things that people see the value of the Halapu Nation and the Mi'kmaq here in this, not just Corner Brook, but the West Coast and Central, then I think people will become more open and embrace it more.
I would have thought that, Frank, I can see you wanting to dive in here.
Well, I guess first and foremost, I would never want to challenge Charles on his knowledge of the Corner Brook dynamic. I'm born and raised here in Sorrento, but you've been involved in many community activities for mayor and all this type of stuff. But I guess the way I'm seeing it is that, like, born and raised on the Bay, grandmother lived all her days in Gillums, these types of things, and yes, many years ago, being like an Indigenous person was, let's be blunt, there were some issues recognizing it. But as every day goes by, and especially as Halapu becomes a more comfortable topic, let's say, that's kind of allowing a much more open dialogue. And what I'm seeing is, whether it's in your workplace, whether it's in your social settings or whatever, recognizing the just the simple fact, not good, not bad, just that it is. Okay? And I think that's kind of the place where we need to get. It's not a matter of benefits or a matter of culture or whatever. It is. Okay? And I'd like to say, from a numbers point of view, without getting into, the detailed numbers, because actually, in my mind, I only know rough numbers, but, Corner Brook is closer to 10 than closer to 5. Okay? But I think the key thing that everybody needs to keep in mind, that there are many incorporated communities, without even going into the local service districts, that I would say that we're going to be towards 50, 60, 70% of the population are members of Halapu. And we're not even talking about people that now self-identify. So, you know, like many of the communities, Bay St. George, you know, so what I guess I'm looking at is in those sense that, well, basically that's a good thing, that people are recognizing that, so.
But Charles, if I go back to you for a second, I would have thought that Corner Brook as a city would have, if nothing else, recognized the economic angle. Let's face it, Corner Brook is facing some challenges. There's population decrease. Economically, there are challenges, and the Halibu phenomenon is one of the best things to happen in Corner Brook since Brentford campus came here. So, one might ask whether Corner Brook is slow to embrace what could be a very good thing, and one of the best things that Corner Brook has going for it right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's like everything else. Once it's new, it takes time for people to get their heads around it. I mean, the city is focused on delivering services to its residents. That's what it does. It provides water, snow,
Potholes,
those
pavement.
types of things. Potholes, pavements, garbage collection, those types of things. And I guess, you know, when we first even sat down with the Halibu, I mean, I think Frank's right. You know, I think half the population of Corner Brook is pretty well, you know, a member of Halibu or Mi'kmaq, or probably more. So, you know, there's an awful lot of people out there, and there's a lot of Mi'kmaq businesses in Corner Brook. Mi'kmaq owners, Mi'kmaq who are putting, you know, dollars into the community and who are developing their businesses as Mi'kmaq enterprises. So there's a lot of that out there in economic development, but it seems to be fairly, probably under the radar a little bit, that people don't realize or acknowledge or know that this activity is going on. I mean, if you look at the money that's being spent for healthcare, for education, you know, that enable the members of the Halibu to go to whether it's university or trade school or whatever, there's millions of dollars coming into this community, and there doesn't seem to be a very great awareness of it out there for some reason, and I don't know what that is. And the other side of that is there's a huge opportunity to develop this community economically with the Halibu as a partner.
So if you could look ahead in the time machine and take us 5, 7, 10 years from now, what if Corner Brook did embrace its Aboriginal identity? What would Corner Brook look like if it fulfilled the promise of being an Indigenous city with, according to Frank, is half Aboriginal?
Well, the sky's the limit. I mean, if you look at any other community across Canada where you have an Indigenous population, there's all kinds of opportunity from culture, from tourism point of view, from economic point of view. If you look at the potential here to develop an urban reserve, for instance, or a business park, whatever, you know, that should take, whatever form, there's huge opportunities here to develop the economy here. And, you know, it's having that conversation not only with council, but with the business people, with the broader community, and that's been ongoing over the last year or so. But it's something that's, again, relatively new. But, you know, in 5, 7, 10 years, you could and should have a community with a fairly large Indigenous population involved in the economic activity of this community, whether it's a cultural activity, a tourism activity, or developing businesses that are going to generate wealth not only for the Mi'kmaq and the Halibu, but for everyone in this community and everyone on the West Coast.
Suzanne, let me turn to you. You left St. George's and you came back, and tell us about what St. George's was like when you left, and what it was like when you came back to St. George's.
Well, when I left, there were some murmurings about, you know, you should join the Flat Bay band with Violet Dawson, or you should join Bert Alexander's band, because somewhere up the road, the federal government was going to give some benefits to...
Just remind us what year you're talking about there?
That would be probably 1999, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And so I left at that time, and I moved to New Brunswick. And when I came back, so now at that time when I left, it was still not popular to be an Indian, and it would upset people if you said so. However, some people were figuring out that there were some benefits to it. I never saw any culture whatsoever, or any ceremonies or traditions as you would think a Mi'kmaq community would be. When I came back, I was absolutely shocked, because there was regular drumming, weekly drumming in 2 communities. There were elders. There were ceremonies. It was people embracing their culture. It was wonderful to see. Unfortunately, as happens in most new, when you're reviving a culture, there are different pods of people, and instead of working together, it kind of seemed like they were working against each other, or certainly not willing to work as a team. So that was a little disappointing. But in terms of the cultural revival, it was amazing.
Mm. And what is it that gets in the way of people working together? They have a different vision of what being Mi'kmaq was about, or what was that about?
Absolutely. Like you had, and you still have, some people who say, you know, this is a unique culture, it's in Newfoundland, and we're going to practice the way we always have. And then you have others who follow the Mi'kmaq teachings from the mainland. Also, there's a huge divisiveness between, because of this enrollment process. It's caused people to feel shut out of their culture. As a matter of fact, I had someone, not just one, a couple of people say to me, I'd say, "Are you going drumming tonight?" "Well, no, I received my letter and it says I'm not a Mi'kmaq." So that we know, of course, that that's not the case. I mean, you're Mi'kmaq no matter if you belong to Halibu or not. But that divisiveness has caused such an issue with so many people.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Now, I want to change the topic a little bit and ask you about something that we've discussed in the past, and that is the opioid crisis that affects us the way it affects many parts of North America. Crime worker observation of the phenomenon in the Bay St. George area. There is some anecdotal evidence that the crisis is affecting that region perhaps even more severely than other areas, just based on things like the number of needles being sent to the Bay St. George area by the Needle Exchange Project in Corner Brook, for example, and the stats and the change of the stats. What do you think there is? What do you think is the underlying problem that people are gravitating to drugs to deal with?
Well, I think in so many communities, it's no different. It's a history of alcoholism. There's a history of child abuse. There's a history of people not embracing their culture, not finding their culture, and not growing up with it. There were many people too, many families, and mine was one, that denied any connection with an Indigenous culture. So. You know, you see a lot of that in places where there's a lot of drug abuse and alcoholism. There's not a way of working with people in terms of their particular culture. There's nothing that offers a traditional way of working with people to overcome addictions. Unfortunately, I thought by now Halibu would have created an addiction center or a healing center, something that would have addressed this issue. I mean, we're kind of skirting all around, dealing with other things that are not important when we're losing our people.
So, and in what instances do you think that culture can be a response to an addiction issue? I mean, I guess it's easy to throw that out as the Band-Aid to respond to all situations, but what do you think the ingredients are in a successful cultural approach to addictions?
Well, as I said to when we spoke about this before, I believe that the Western therapeutic model is certainly a help. But when you're an Indigenous person with your own cultures and traditions, you have to bring that into play to heal totally. So right now what we're doing is we're kind of, like you said, I think putting Band-Aids on it. When you have your culture with its ceremonies, with its cohesiveness, because that's what you see in Mi'kmaq communities, then a person with addictions can be helped I came home and I had an addiction. I worked with the Mi'kmaq community with an elder, and I overcame it. I had tried in New Brunswick using just the Western therapeutic model, and I couldn't do it. So when I came here, used sweat lodges, used pipe ceremonies, used counseling with an elder, I overcame it. And it's important because if that's a part of your life, and if that's a part of your culture and part of your heritage, then it has to come into play in healing you.
Frank, let's go back to you. You're the counselor for Glenwood, and Glenwood is for Glenwood Ward. And for a geography lesson, for those of us who aren't familiar with Glenwood, it's in Central, close to this side of just this side of Gander, I would say.
Yeah, it kind of starts, say, halfway between Grand Falls and Gander. It picks up Lewisport, and obviously Glenwood, Appleton, goes through Gander, Benton, and actually there's an outlier right to Swift Current.
Now tell us about the job of being a council member on the Alibu band. It's not your day job. It's I guess we would call it a volunteer position.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I call my day job my mortgage job.
Right.
But I guess being a counselor, I usually would say first when I came into it, I was very naive. Previous chief or board counselor, because it was in a transition area, Sis Vaders was the one who me and her had numerous conversations, and as the structure at the time, she couldn't run because she was a member, or is a member of booking. So basically, we had some long conversations, but going forward, I guess that was the first elected council of Halibu, and I guess really it's not that much different than being an elected person in a lot of things with the piece of being a First Nations organization. We much more member centric. And I hear what you're saying there and things of this nature, and these are the types of conversations. But I think everybody needs to recognize that Halibu, right from the beginning, recognized that we need to have a very strong, transparent, the same buzzwords, accountable, transparent, I guess, I use the word government. Sometimes people look at that as a negative term, but I don't, because really it kind of comes down to it's we're expected, and I don't know, I find a better word, but pavement and potholes is probably not a bad way, because we need to implement the programs and services that are.
And Frank, I guess this you were speaking from the heart now, because I think it's a fact. You are a government bureaucrat. And some people might.
It sounds like a dirty word. That's not a dirty word.
It does sound like a dirty word to some people. But let me ask you about the idea of bureaucracy, because this is the thing that is one of the criticisms of the band, is that it is a bureaucracy.
Well, I guess I guess it is a criticism, and sometimes it's a valid criticism, because it's awful easy to get a little distant from the direct member services. That happens. It's easy.
But tell us the positives. Is there a positive aspect of
I guess first and foremost, I like to use a term rather than bureaucracy. If you don't mind me trying to educate you, I don't mind teasing you a little. But I'd use the word administration. Okay, it's administration of programs and services that we have been able to receive through our funding partners. A lot of it is ONEC, but it's also, it could be provincial government, it could be special funding, things of this nature, where we've some of our standard programs and things of this nature. But it is the means, it's the mechanism that we both implement and be held accountable to, so that if your son or daughter applies for education and my son or daughter applies for education, both get reviewed the same. Okay? If my mom or dad needs non-insured health benefits, or someone else's mom, it's the same. It's a consistent, transparent, and I would go so far as to say reportable way of doing business, and it's the only way that we're still utilizing public funds to put out services, and I keep going back to our that we want to get further along in other things that our members need and ask for.
And let me ask you that, because I guess the challenge is you talk about the administrative aspect of being a band, and I think the Alibu band is quite strong in that department. But we're hearing from and what Suzanne is telling us, a certain distance between the everyday lives of people and the band. So how do you bridge that?
Well, I guess the way I look at it is that, like, okay, I'm a second-term councillor. Okay, the first-term councillor, not to disrespect the leader at the time, Chief Brendan Shepherd, but it was a much more internalistic perspective. Okay, the council where we are now, we're working as hard and as diligent as we can to be as open and all these types of things, and just as not to bring in the business of the band into this conversation, because to some extent it's not needed, but like just today I received an email from Chief reminding all the council to get your town hall meetings in. It's an expectation of the chief, it's an expectation of council in general. We're all expected if to attend, to participate, to get the word out, to bring that back to council as our discussion, to share the knowledge, and that's along with all the other information that gets shared. So what I guess I'm saying is that first term council was probably a little more internalistic, but they were internalistic because they kind of had to. They needed to get the programs and services up and running relatively quickly. To some extent, there was fairly large education programming available, and that we had many members asking for that opportunity, and we needed to be able to do so in a manner that we could provide that to our funding partner. So, as we grow, we definitely are looking to find ways to meet the needs of all our members, because I wouldn't necessarily say that all of our members feel that we're not providing good services. I do think that there are many do feel that way, and that's the ones that we're working on. But I would challenge you that Alibu is not really providing the services that members want.
Do you think one of the challenges is that the Alibu covers communities over a very large area? If you're in Glenwood, for example, you're closer to Nailbegag in Con River than you are to York Harbor, where I'm from, to the Bay of Isles. So it's a huge area,
but that's I guess yes, but no. Of course, we have a connection in central to Malwoki First Nation, absolutely. But at the same time period, the fundamentals of Alibu it was formed from 9 previous Federation of Land Indian bands. So that's why the 9 councillors or war councillors are there. So we bring that geographic diversity to the table. So to be blunt, besides the challenges of making it happen, I see it as a fundamental strength, especially going forward. That and you see the concentration. Like in Bay St. George, you have a councillor from Stephenville, Port-au-Port, St. George's, Flat Bay. Okay, so that kind of reflects that there was a fair amount of those in Corner Brook. You have you had Corner Brook Ward, you had the Benwas Cove Ward, and things of this nature. Then the next concentration is Grand Falls, Gander Bay, Glenwood. So from where I'm sitting, yeah, it's tough, but that's kind of on the elected people like myself. And remember too, Glenn, Alibu was continuously trying to what do you want to call it, expand its physical presence. In just in the second term, we've opened an office in Stephenville. We've opened an office in Grand Falls. That's in addition to what we had, the very traditional office. There's one, I don't know how long in St. George's, probably many years. Glenwood has an office in, and each of these places provide services to the entire membership, not just the people that live in that area. So like Glenwood provides desperate healthcare navigators base. So if you're from York Harbor or you're from wherever, that's you would go.
That's where they answer the phone.
Yeah. So but that's the philosophy that we subscribe to. The missing piece from the first term to now is that we're trying to ensure that we respond as the members ask us to change how we're doing our business, that we respond to that. And I think we do.
And I suppose being a councillor, the other challenge there is you're elected by the people in Glenwood.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if they don't like what you're doing, then you won't be elected next time.
Nor should I.
But when you're at the council table, you are a Halibu councillor. So how do you balance Glenwood and the larger nation?
Well, I guess for myself, there's a few little things that I do. And when I'm at the council table, I'm representing, the elected people of Glenwood, and I vote as I think the Glenwood people or the Glenwood Ward people would want me to, things of this nature. But if I'm assigned a committee role where I'm representing the full nation, well, I do as best I can based upon what I think the full nation asks of me. So that's how I do it. But basically, the way I look at it, everybody has their own little nuances, but pretty much everybody on council brings a very strong voice to their area that they were elected for. But they always, every one of them, everyone on council tries to do what's best for the nation based upon their knowledge of the time. And sometimes I know for myself, I've intended to vote one way and someone speaks their heart.
Someone changes your mind?
Absolutely. I didn't admit, did I say that aloud that time?
You've admitted on air that
well,
you've changed your mind.
Gerard will like that.
You're listening to Mi'kmaq Matters live from Grenfell campus in Corner Brook. Send us a comment or ask a question at facebook.com/Mi'kmaq Matters. And shortly we'll pass the mic around the room here. Suzanne, I want to go back to you. Of course, one of the challenges we're dealing with are people with cards and those without. And you talked about, mentioned the woman who decided not to go to drumming because when she found out she was not getting a card. Let me ask you about how things worked in NON, in the Aboriginal Women's Network. How does it work there based on who can be a member and who can be involved?
NON is status blind. We accept members whether they're Indigenous or non-Indigenous. We accept anyone. The programming is based on whatever's good for that person at that time. So we absolutely do training and programming in topics that would be interesting to the whole population. We don't have any lines.
And I wonder if that's a model, because it seems that one of the challenges going forward is that we need to find a way to bridge the two groups. Of course, the Halibu Band is a band and provides services to members, and there are certain legalities there and certain constraints, but NON doesn't have those requirements.
Right, and I listened to Frank, and I still felt that the issue I brought up wasn't addressed, because when you talk about what people bring, the questions they bring, the issues they bring to the table, the votes that they take, unfortunately in our population, we can't always say, and people can't always say what's important to them. But when you're looking at a healing center or an addiction center, or at the very least addressing the crisis that's in our people, that's not something that you take a vote on or you listen to people on, because the people who are most affected by that are addicted. They're in crisis. They're not able, and some are not here anymore because these issues in our people are not being addressed. So I'm not sure what could be more important than that. That's my burning passion. So in terms of the band, or including people that maybe should be included, that's the enrollment issue. That was that was marred from the beginning. It's not going to be any, no matter what happens with these replies, that's not going to be fixed anytime soon. So, well, I heard both of my colleagues here talk about how there are many communities that are 75% Halibu. But there are communities that are 100% Mi'kmaq. Bay St. George is 90+% Mi'kmaq, not Halibu, Mi'kmaq.
And that's the challenge that we face going forward. Charles, in Corner Brook, what do you think is the situation here between people with status and people without? Do you think there are resentments with people who didn't get status, and they look across the street and see people who do? Is it a divisive thing, do you think, in Corner Brook?
I think it exists. I don't know how divisive it is. I mean, it's no different in Corner Brook than, say, Flat Bay or Glenwood. I mean, it's the same everywhere, right? People have their opinions. I think in Corner Brook we're fortunate. We have places like Grenfell. We have organizations like the RNC who are very open and very forward-thinking, and who look at Halipu and look at the Mi'kmaq as just another people group who merit the role that they have in the community. So I think, in that sense, we're a little more, I won't say more enlightened than anyone else, but at least we have some organizations, some people here that are more receptive, more open, I guess, and less divisive, maybe, but I'm sure it exists here just as it exists anywhere else. And if I can, I want to go back to what Frank was saying about administration, because you're right. And when I come in as a mayor, government existed since 1956 as a council, so everything's in place, everything exists. When you start to create something new, from 2010 on, right, and create something that didn't exist before, there's lots of examples all across the country, but you have to make sure that every cent is accounted for, every decision is open, transparent, and so on. And that's not an easy job. And then you also have to try to meet the demands of every member and every issue and so on. It's complicated, and it takes time for an organization to mature. And when you have a new organization that you say second-term councilors are just hitting their stride as an organization, and it takes time, and it takes time to acknowledge issues that are arising or have been out there for maybe a year or so. It's not something that you can make a decision and understand and know exactly what to do for every situation right away. And as somebody who's been in council and dealt with these issues for 15 years or more, it's not an easy job, and it's not an easy process, but it takes time, and you're heading in the right direction, and it will mature over time. But there's always going to be questions about, are you doing enough? Are you doing the right thing for the right group? What about us out here? What about us over there? You're going to get that no matter who you serve and what your constituency is. So all those things, like Frank was saying, it's going to take time, and you can't please everyone ever. So it's a work in progress.
So you're asking people to cut the band some slack and be patient.
Well, if you want to be part of something, you have to embrace it. And that doesn't mean that you don't ask questions, you don't criticize. I think the band has been very open, very transparent, much more so than many government organizations that I've dealt with. And if you look around the world today, many organizations have been, and administrations have been organized and set up to avoid answering questions and avoid, the bureaucracy that exists. There's very little bureaucracy at the Halibu, if you look at it. And my experience has been, if you want to be engaged, if you want to know something, you can, and you can find out whatever you want. You can ask questions, you can be engaged, you can avail of services. So the question is, how do you go about doing that? And that's as much on us as a member, individually and collectively, as it is on the administration and the council.
And I would encourage people Halipu members to attend council meetings. I often go, and I don't think there have been some larger meetings where there have been perhaps 50 or close to 100 people, specifically on the enrollment issue, but on the other meetings, it's 5, 10, and not that many. So I guess the opportunity is there if people want to take advantage of
It's
it.
interesting because three of us just had that conversation before we went on air, and saying, there's no big issue, nobody shows up. There's a big issue, everyone shows up. I remember being at the high school when there was an enrollment questionnaire last year. The whole one was full. There was a couple hundred people out, and yet, like you say, if you go to a council meeting, I've never been to one. And if you go to one, I don't know how many people from the band show up, but I suggest there's not too many.
I'm scanning the room to ask to see if anyone wants to ask a question. And you can also ask a question by going to the on our Facebook page. Charles, I want to ask you about your involvement with the Alamo Cultural Foundation, and you remarked that you weren't there for the Gross Mourning experience. But in light of what Suzanne talked about in terms of people wanting access to culture, whether they're people of status or not, and this divide we have between people, what do you see as the role for your alma mater cultural foundation going forward, and what do you think we can learn from the Gross Mourning experience this past year?
Well, first of all, I guess when I was asked by the former chief to take on the chair role, from my point of view at the time, the discussion we had was to establish the Cultural Foundation because it didn't exist. And so that was the creation of the bylaws, it was the creation of the actual organization itself, and working then with staff to start at the very end of it, start doing like your Harvest Festival and things like that, and your outreach and things that would come over under the Cultural Foundation eventually. So after I was mayor for a year or so, I said, okay, I just had too much to do, and it would turn it over to somebody else. And up until that point, we really hadn't, I don't think, developed what is the cultural aspect. So for me, it was really about the establishment of this organization. How are we going to fund it? What were some of the activities we'd undertake? And the initial fundraiser was the first one, right? The Harvest Celebration, and I think they've had 3 now to date. And I don't think it was clear as well to the Halapu people what the Culture Foundation was. So that was another issue, because I don't think we around the table were totally clear about what it was. And I think somebody mentioned earlier, I think Suzanne said, is it my way of doing it or is it your way of doing it? Who's right, who's not right, and so on. So there was a lot of discussion around, what is the right approach, what is the right, practice, who do we listen to, and who makes those decisions. And when I was done as chair, those questions were still on the table. So, I think the idea of moving forward and trying to, how do you engage everyone? And it's like everything else. You don't know it's an issue until you make a decision and then somebody says, well, I don't agree with that. And oftentimes that's what happens. Because if you're not engaged in the process, if you're not following along, and then, word gets out that you're doing something and somebody doesn't agree with it. And then that becomes a major issue, and then all of a sudden, there's something that people try to do with all the best intentions in the world backfired. And that's going to happen. It's a young organization. It's a new organization. People are not, at least in the cultural foundation, maybe not totally in tune with what is exactly the role of what they're doing. Where do we get our teachings? Who are we learning from? What is, authentic? We even had that discussion. What is authentic Halapu culture? So there's going to be a lot of questions, and as many people as there are, there's that many opinions.
And people take these things very passionately. It's all about culture, so quite appropriately, people would be concerned about these cultural issues, because that, at the end of the day, that's why we do what we do, and it's pretty fundamental to the experience.
And as they should be.
Yes.
Everyone has their opinion. It's innate for a lot of people what their culture is. And for somebody else to make decisions that you don't agree with, well, then you're going to speak out. And, whether it was too much too soon, I don't know. But at the end of the day, it was canceled. And a lot of people look at that and say, well, was that the right thing to do? So again, everyone has their opinion.
Some people up the coast who I talked to were disappointed about the cancellation. So it was a very complex experience. I think an experience that we should try and learn from as we go forward. Frank, let me ask you about the challenge going forward of the Halibu as a band dealing with this phenomenon of the non people without status. Do you think there's going to be an expectation that the Halibu as a band respond, do things for, include somehow people who don't have status cards and therefore legally aren't your responsibility, but do you think there's going to be that expectation?
Well, I guess right now, I would think, to answer your question, I think it's anybody, of course there will be an expectation, but from a point of view of, Halibu is a First Nation band, so a lot of time, energy goes into the implementation of programs that are for status people in the country. So obviously that's a big part of what we would be doing. How it's going to transpire with respect to people that say have applied and weren't successful, or didn't apply and self-identify now, I think that's a discussion that is really going to be emerging going forward. And the way I would look at it is, I think, I don't know where the phrase got coined, but the first place I heard it, Suzanne said their name was status blind. Really at this point in time, besides, say, attendance at meetings in the sense of AGAs or council meetings, I don't see anybody asking for your status card. And that's, so, right?
I have to disagree.
Well, that's in my experience.
I have to disagree. You're not welcome at Hollywood meetings unless you have...
Well, that's what I said. Council meetings, you have to show your card. But what I'm saying is that we have my experience that we have we support a cultural event or events funded through application process through the Cultural Foundation. There's no ask of, are you a status member, are you not? And I would foresee that, to be fair, the question that may come down to me is what can Halibu afford? And we need to recognize that may become an issue going forward. But at this point in time, I've helped a number of groups apply for funding for this and that, and through the band, and whether it's Aboriginal Day or whether it's a cultural event, but you are right that the attendance at a council meeting or attendance at an AGA, you need to show your status card.
So you were saying, Frank, that a lot of the events that happen at the Halibu building over there in the community room are open to everyone, and you don't have to show a card to go to.
Well, all I guess I would say is I know, say, Paul Blake, as an example, I think had a beading program. I don't think you needed to be a member for that, and I know that because my daughter was going to go, and a friend of hers who was non-Indigenous were going to go, just because, they're friends and they like doing things together. There was no issue. And I would expect that will be the trend going forward. The same thing is happening. There's a project being developed by a couple of two friends in Glenwood. Actually, one is Indigenous from outside of the area, but not a status, and it doesn't matter. That's not the purpose of the purpose is to support the cultural development. So.
Well, I understand when you said about some people, you're helping some people to get some funding and whatever. But I can say that I'm not a status member. But when you look for some money, I can absolutely tell you, as president of NON, that we got $25 to help out with some programming we were doing. So it's, in my own opinion, there are 10,000 status members, maybe 10, 12,000.
As Halibu?
Yeah, as Halibu.
Well, right now the number will be closer to 23, I think it is.
23,000. So 23,000, and when you look at all the applications that were there, those people, the 172 minus 23,000, Halibu is not going to do anything for them. These are the people that are in need. These are the people, because in 23,000, when you look at the amount of addictions, when you look at the amount of needs that they have, and then you look at 150,000 and the amount of addictions and the amount of needs there, somebody's got to come forward to address that. Whether it's Halibu, because we're talking about all First Nation people, all Mi'kmaq people, whether it's Halibu that'll address that, or...
Well, I guess, we're all postulating in the crystal ball of what may or may not happen, but at the end of the day, what I can speak to is my experience with Halibu is that where we can, I like the term status blind. I heard it some road base in Georgia, and I don't know, but I like that term because people can relate to it. But of course, say if Halibu's implementing a non-insured health benefits program, we don't get funding if you're not a status Indian. Are we having conversations with the federal government to find a better model? Absolutely. But at this point in time, we're expected, and I think as holders of the public purse, we would need to, I think that unfortunately many of us have experienced mental health and addictions in many of our families and many of our communities and things of this nature. And basically, I guess most of us are knocking on the door saying there has to be a better way. As a second-term counselor of Halibu, I think Halibu would want to be at that table and as a vigorous partner in any potential solution. That's the best I can say.
We're just coming towards the end. Frank, you're running again in the next election, a year from now?
I would say that I'll be in the political establishment of Halibu till I die. How about that?
I see. Do you have a candidate running against you next October yet?
At this point in time, no. That's when it makes it fun.
Yes. And Charles, I note that you are now without a political engagement. What are your, maybe you have an interest in running? Do you have political aspirations in an Halibu context?
Who knows? Not really. I haven't really given it much thought.
Folks, he didn't deny it. There was no no there. That was a maybe. I heard a definite maybe there from Charles Pender.
Is he running in the next election?
I heard a definite maybe.
He's asking my wife who's standing over there.
Waiting.
You know what? Like I said, I haven't really given it any thought until you asked the question. Again, who knows? It's certainly not my intention right now. Let's put it that way.
Yes. It's been a great discussion. Thank you, panelists, for being vulnerable and dealing with the unexpected and sharing your thoughts. Frank, what is your vision of a Halibu band 10 years from now? What do you want to see?
Well, I guess the way I would like to see is that we become that much more member-centric. So whatever we need to do to become that more member-centric.
Well, and we'll leave it on that positive note, and perhaps we'll reconvene at some months in the future and get a progress report. So let me thank our panelists: Frank Skierd, Suzanne Barry, Charles Pender. Thank you to our audience here. Thank you to Cody Gardner and BOIR, without whom we couldn't have done this. Thanks to Grenfell for hosting us. Thanks to Rogers and Voice of Bombay. Alison Baker is the technical producer of Mi'kmaq Matters. Celebration time used with the permission of Mi'kmaq artist Marcus Goss. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Subscribe on iTunes and SoundCloud. I'm Glenn Wheeler. Till next time.